Hello everyone, my name is Jacqueline Bossman and I am the advisor to SUNY ERIE's Philosophy Club. For those of you who need a refresher, philosophy is taken from the Greek terms to love and wisdom. In practice, it requires a dedication to criteria-based thinking about reality. The standards for a good or a strong belief are the principles of unaided rational argument and careful observation. Philosophers have concerned themselves with the fundamental questions in their search for truth, such as, what is the difference between appearance and reality? What is the difference between opinion and knowledge? What is justice? Philosophy Club is comprised of current SUNY ERIE students and SUNY ERIE alumni who are dedicated to continually sharpening their practice of philosophy. I am very proud to introduce them this evening for this first virtual Philosophy Presents event. At the end of May, after the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police, the Black Lives Matter movement began again the desperately needed conversation about the United States' long history of white supremacy and racism, and the unforgivable toll it has taken and continues to take on countless American citizens. Amidst this national reckoning with racism, the Philosophy Club students expressed a desire to join the conversation and to approach understanding the truth about American racism methodologically and in a criteria-based way. We decided to focus our club's intellectual efforts to studying the work of Dr. George Yancy. The club is humbled by the opportunity to share with you some of the important concepts and practices that they are learning from studying Dr. Yancy's work. In case you don't know who he is, Dr. George Yancy is an American philosophy professor who works in the philosophy department at Emory University. If you go on the Emory University website, you can see Dr. Yancy's research focuses are critical philosophy of race, critical whiteness studies, critical phenomenology, especially racial embodiment, African American philosophy, and the philosophy of Black experience. I encourage you all to go and to read through his awards and fellowships and distinguished appointments, his keynote addresses, his Philosophy of Race book series and other authored and co-authored texts, as well as his articles from the New York Times, The Stone, including the two most recent, one on the nature of policing, another his response to the Ahmaud Arbery killing. During tonight's presentation, the Philosophy Club will present what they have learned. The students have pre-recorded comments on topics from Dr. George Yancy's work. Tonight we'll play those recordings, and then we'll open up for discussion.
On October 17th, 2017, Dr. George Yancy gave a talk on white privilege in the classroom as part of a faculty workshop series focused on inclusive classrooms, which took place at Emory University. Dr. Yancy said the following, quote, "When teaching courses that explore race and whiteness, I think that for whites, and this includes white teachers, as well as white students, white professors, they must nurture the following dispositions. And I'm calling them dispositions because one is always striving. So, they're dispositions even as you will fail as you do them. So 1, a willingness, and this feels a little bit repetitive for me because I've thought about it for so long, but it'll be new to you, I hope. A willingness to speak parrhesia. That Greek word that means fearless or courageous speech. It also means to say it all. If you guys know Michel Foucault, he talks about this. The one who speaks parrhesia is the Parrhesiastes. Martin Luther King, Audre Lorde, Socrates, you pick your figure. But it's parrhesia, this desire and this aim to speak fearlessly, or courageously is a better word." End quote. Now, I just want to highlight a few things. First, I want to point out that Dr. Yancy's advice to speak parrhesia in this context is itself a form of parrhesia. It is, in fact, courageous to encourage others to speak courageously. Secondly, I wanted to expand on this idea that Dr. Yancy brought up about how parrhesia isn't just about speaking courageously, but it also means to, in his words, say it all. My interpretation of this is that one cannot just courageously speak about topics and ideas that they are comfortable speaking courageously about. It's arguable that the most courageous forms of speech are when we speak about topics or ideas we find most uncomfortable. And lastly, going off this notion of being uncomfortable, I want to emphasize this idea that parrhesia is a disposition and that one is always striving. It may be uncomfortable and hard to accept, but one does not arrive. There is no finish line. Similar to how in other personal endeavors, such as a hobby or other skill, there may be milestones that will be reached, but one should never be done improving, or at least one should never be done attempting to improve. So this is all to say that parrhesia is a process. And as a final word, don't forget to strive.
Dr. George Yancy emphasizes the importance of an engaged learning experience through his perspective on teaching racism in the classroom. In the book, The Center Must Not Hold, White Women Philosophers on the Whiteness of Philosophy, edited by Dr. Yancy, his introduction titled Troublemaking Allies characterizes the classroom as a dangerous space. Dangerous spaces in the context of the classroom represent an environment where students are making the choice to be courageous in the face of criticism. In Dr. Yancy's introduction, Troublemaking Allies, he states, deploying the self as a point of critical embarkation need not take the form of escapism or narcissism. To engage in educational practices that are liberating, trust is indispensable. My pedagogy emphasizes the important point that an engaged form of collective eluncus or cross-examination has the potential for creating conditions that help make us into better human beings, not simply better scholars or intellectuals. In this quote, conditions describes dangerous spaces in a classroom, particularly creating conditions that challenge students' previous narratives regarding white supremacy. If students desire to be honest with themselves, critically embarking on the topic of racism is not a self-involved endeavor, requiring students to think outside of themselves. The classroom should be a place where we are called to become better people, not just better students.
In Dr. George Yancy's letter to the New York Times, Dear White America, he writes, are you prepared to be at war with yourself, with your white identity, your white power, your white privilege? His usage of the word war is intense as it should be. He's asking us as white people to do something that is against the nature of all people, actively engage our cognitive dissonance. We always want to see the best in ourselves and be the best version of ourselves. So much in the way that we all have the tendency to believe we are right about everything we've learned in our lifetimes, with no possibility of error, so too do white people believe that they cannot possibly be racist, especially by doing nothing. But white people are not only being asked to admit to wrongdoing, but to identify that white people are the cogs in the machine of systemic racism. If white people critically reflect on the extensive history of racism in the United States, then they are forced to become vulnerable to their complicity to the structures of white supremacy and privilege. In a presentation Dr. Yancy gave on white privilege in the classroom at Emory University, he includes this anecdote. A white student was asked by his father what he was studying in his college classes. When the student told his father that he was studying whiteness and white privilege, his father told him to be careful and not to let Dr. Yancy make him feel bad about being white. The father was teaching his son to hide from any sort of confrontation with his whiteness, to further plant his feet into the ground he is most comfortable standing on, and to remain sutured. Dr. Yancy hones in on this idea of being sutured and invites white people to enter an uncomfortable state of un-suturedness. When these wounds are open, they can be appropriately addressed. This demonstrates the importance of true vulnerability.
So, in presenting Dear White America, Dr. Yancy has something of a dilemma. On the one hand, he has to wound his white readers in order to enlighten them. Indeed, this is his objective. White America will only read him and consider their latent racism if they are wounded. Readers' woundedness, their narrative, cognitive, and embodied disorientation, un-suturedness, preconditions their philosophical growth. On the other hand, he needs whites to be open to his message and to trust him. Harsh truths are not what white New York Times readers want for Christmas. He risks their rejection. He anticipates their angry, reflexive foreclosure of philosophical reflection. If he is too forthright, all he'll get is white backlash. So, alternatively, he could deliver the gift as politely as academically possible, as is customary in formalized, deodorized philosophy spaces, and white America could treat the gift like a fruitcake. Ignore it, customarily. To be sure, Dr. Yancy knows truth-telling is preferable. As gifts, the philosophical wounds born of Socratically radical teachings, Parrhesia, are better than the syrupy sweets of Hallmark card philosophy. He takes a third way. He makes himself vulnerable. He opens, quote, "What if I told you I'm a sexist? Well, I am," unquote. Yancy is vulnerable as can be. He is seen. Quote, "No taking it back now," unquote. He imagines his readers' horror. They are morally dumbfounded. Sexist in the popular imagination means monster. Surely he's joking. But what does it mean to be a sexist? Dr. Yancy clarifies, quote, "This doesn't mean I intentionally hate women or desire to oppress them. It means that despite my best intentions, I perpetuate sexism every day of my life. Please don't take this as a confession for which I'm seeking forgiveness. I have failed to transcend the rigidity of gender roles in my own life. I have been complicit with, and have allowed myself to be seduced by, a country that makes billions of dollars from objectifying women. I am not innocent. I have been fed a poisonous diet of images that fragment women into mere body parts. I have also been complicit with a dominant male narrative that says women enjoy being treated like sex toys. And even as I know how false these sexist assumptions are, I am often ambushed by my own hidden sexism. Men's collective erotic feelings and fantasies are complicit in the degradation of women," unquote. This is not sexism of the monstrous kind, the aberrant behavior of a few abhorrent men. It is more mundane and more insidious. It is the kind that circulates within the male space, where women are things to be, quote, "used for men's visual and physical titillation," unquote. In a patriarchal landscape, all men, however friendly to feminism, are towering transmitters of misogynistic norms and notions. No man is innocent, all men are complicit. With such an exposition, Dr. Yancy readies himself to address white America. He hopes whites, in turn, can make an imaginative leap and address their own complicity in systemic racism. Using spatial framing, he has illuminated the everyday sexism in the world, and he hopes white America can use the same metaphors to see their everyday racism. He shows his all-too-human non-innocence, and he hopes that white America will not hold fast to white innocence. Quote, "No turning back now," unquote. Here, Dr. Yancy presents his dangerous thesis, a gift from one non-innocent ist to another, with Baldwinian love.
In calling whites racist, Dr. George Yancy is not calling them evil. His goal is to catalyze the process in which whites are becoming more aware of their racism, and therefore becoming more able to abate that racism. It's important to use his gift and to reflect on his gift, using the same love that Dr. Yancy offers it with. Not a romantic Hollywood love, but a philosophical kind of love that has been described by 20th century writer, thinker, and activist James Baldwin. A love in which we are vulnerable and intimate with each other, enough so that we may live without our masks. As Dr. Yancy puts it in Dear White America, it's a sort of love that demands that you look at parts of yourself that might cause pain and terror. The removal of his own mask allows him to speak openly about his sexism, and he's already experienced the pain and terror of examining his darker biases. It's this philosophical love, the removal of one's mask, the unsuturing of their identity, that allows for honest, courageous speech, for parrhesia. James Baldwin once said, "If you can't love anybody, you're dangerous, because you have no way of learning humility. No way of learning that other people suffer. And no way of learning how to use your suffering and theirs to get from one place to another." Dr. Yancy evokes Baldwin's ideas about love in a similar quote of his own, saying, "I am fragile. I am a broken vessel. But let me show you how you might be able to use that as a way of exploring your own racism."
This concludes the pre-recordings that Philosophy Club created for this event. We will now open the presentation up for discussion. You were all given the New York Times article, Dear White America. If you have any comments or questions about the article, feel free to raise them now. Also, feel free to raise any comments or questions about the 5 topics discussed by the Philosophy Club students: parrhesia, dangerous spaces in the classroom, vulnerability and unsuturedness and cognitive dissonance, Dr. Yancy's own expression of vulnerability and the analogy he created by addressing his internalized sexism, the philosophical gift of truth-telling, truth-seeking, and love. Thank you.